Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Japan on Thursday started to release the Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. Around 1.3 million tons of wastewater will be let out over the next 30 years. Also on Thursday, North Korea had a second attempt at launching its very first spy satellite, now only to experience yet another failure. The regime will go for a third try in October. Starting from the end of this month, South Korea will downgrade the infection classification level of COVID-19 to the lowest level, Class 4, meaning the virus will be treated like seasonal flu from now on. Back in 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake triggered a massive tsunami, which knocked out the Fukushima nuclear power plant's power supply and cooling systems. And 12 years later, the remnants of the disaster will be released into the Pacific Ocean. That's around 1.3 million tons of wastewater. Our Kim Jong-sil covered the first day of the 3-decade-long process.
12 years. That's how long it took for Japan to be able to start getting rid of the wastewater that haunted the government since the 2011 Tohoku tsunami and earthquake disaster. The first batch of around 1.3 million tons of stored wastewater was discharged into the Pacific Ocean on Thursday. A first step toward decommissioning the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The plant's operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company, held a press conference on Thursday and said 200 to 210 tons of wastewater will be released by Thursday midnight. From Friday, the company plans to release around 460 tons in a 24-hour window. Ahead of the release, Japan uses a filtering system called Multi-Nuclide Removal Facility, also known as ALPS. The Japanese government says ALPS can bring down all radioactive substances to below government standards except tritium. This is why Japan keeps bringing it up. Ahead of the release, TEPCO officials also announced tritium concentration levels to the public. They conducted a check on Tuesday by mixing a liter of contaminated water with 1,200 tons of seawater. Japanese officials said the tritium concentration level was 43 to 63 becquerels per liter, far below a self-designated standard of 1,500 becquerels per liter. With the help of ALPS, Japanese officials hope to complete the discharge over the next 30 years. 3 decades is still a long time, so securing safety will be a challenge. Another big hurdle is getting rid of the fuel debris inside some of the reactors. The highly radioactive debris is a mixture of melted nuclear fuel and structures surrounding it. They were found on the floors of reactors number 1 to 3 after the 2011 disaster. Even experts in Japan are saying that getting rid of those will be a challenge. There are around 880 known tons of radioactive debris. Japan's Asahi Shimbun said not a gram of it has been taken out as of this March. Japan is working on developing robots that can do the job, but it hasn't been easy. Even with the release of the first batch of wastewater, Japan still has many tough challenges to overcome. Kim Jong-sil, 아리랑뉴스.
With the first batch of the wastewater released, the South Korean government once again called on Japan to transparently disclose information on the release. Keeping the health and safety of the public its top priority, Seoul is planning to send its own experts to Fukushima every 2 weeks. That's on top of receiving related data from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Let's turn to our Pae-eun-ji for more.
Soon after Japan started releasing the wastewater on Thursday, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said in a briefing that what's important now is for Japan to keep its promise to the international community, to strictly follow the scientific guidelines and transparently disclose information.
Our government hopes and urges the Japanese government to disclose information about the water discharge process that will continue over the next 30 years in a transparent and responsible manner.
Noting that the South Korean government has been putting the health and safety of people in Korea first and foremost, he said excessive concern is unnecessary, and said import bans on fisheries and food products from Fukushima will be in place until public concerns are eased. This comes amid public fear and frustration in South Korea, with civic groups launching protests despite the government's reassurances. The Prime Minister also gave details on what the country has agreed upon with Japan through negotiations. First, South Korean experts will be sent to the IAEA office in Fukushima every 2 weeks to check if Japan is following IAEA safety standards and to make sure it doesn't go wrong. And second, even when the experts are not there, Japan will provide data on the wastewater released to the South Korean government every hour. Also, South Korea will be closely communicating with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Officials from the two sides that are in charge of the role will receive the latest information every single day through regular meetings that will be held virtually. Separately, the IAEA, which opened an office at the Fukushima nuclear power plant last month, launched an on-site inspection. It released new information on its website on Thursday that provides real-time data on the safety of each of the 6 steps included in the discharge process. As of 8 p.m., all 6 stages were given the green light, indicating that there were no unexpected levels of radiation, and the amount of tritium in the water was 207 becquerel per liter. Tritium is a material that will remain even after it goes through the purification system, as it's hard to separate from water. Despite concerns from Japan's local fishing groups and nearby countries, the UN nuclear watchdog had earlier approved the discharge, saying it finds the plans to be consistent with international safety standards. 아리랑뉴스.
North Korea on Thursday went ahead with its second attempt to launch what it insists to be a space launch vehicle and failed once again. But in a rare move, the regime made public that its third launch will take place in October. Our Lee Dae-hyun has the details on the second launch trial.
Pyongyang's second attempt to put a satellite in orbit took place at around 3:50 a.m. on Thursday. The North Korea Central News Agency said that the flight's first and second stages of the rocket were normal, but during the third stage, it failed due to an error in the emergency blasting system. The North Korean National Aerospace Development Administration said it will explain the reason for the error soon, adding that a third attempt will likely come in October. Multiple Japanese news outlets said that Japan's Coast Guard had earlier presumed that the launch could have been a ballistic missile, adding that it separated into pieces which landed in the West Sea, East China Sea, and the Pacific Ocean near the Philippines. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that it detected the rocket flying above international waters off the Korean peninsula's west coast after its launch from the northwestern Dongchangni area where the main space launch center is located.
South Korea will continue high-intensity Seoul-Washington joint military drills while closely monitoring Pyongyang's further actions.
Seoul's military officials also said that they are currently in the process of retrieving the satellite body and the wreckage that has fallen in the West Sea. According to one expert, Pyongyang's rush to put the satellite into orbit before the regime's National Foundation Day next month could have been a reason for the failure.
May's attempt revealed problems with both the engine and fuel, which means reconstruction was needed. But launching just 3 months after that shows that there wasn't a high possibility of the plan succeeding.
Meanwhile, officials from the South's Defense Ministry and other related officials attended the National Security Council meeting at around 6 a.m. Members of the council strongly condemned the launch and said that it clearly violates the UN Security Council resolutions. President Yoon Suk-yeol also ordered officials to brace for any additional provocations by North Korea and share the analysis result with Washington and Tokyo. He also asked to promptly carry out what had been pledged in the Camp David Trilateral Summit earlier, such as sharing missile alert information in real time and strengthening defense ties for missile provocations. U.S. State Department also agreed that the failed launch was a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and urged Pyongyang to stop illicit and threatening activities. Washington added that it still pursues dialogue without preconditions with North Korea. Lee Dae-hyun, 아리랑뉴스.
And North Korea's latest launch attempt came while South Korea and the U.S. are carrying out their joint military drills dubbed Ulchi Freedom Shield. A part of that joint training is urban warfare drills, staging and responding tactically and swiftly in real-life war scenarios in urban settings. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung was there.
A fierce battle unfolds in a small mocked-up town in Paju, Gyeonggi-do province. Soldiers of the South Korean and U.S. armies infiltrate a building and take positions to target the enemy. This is a joint urban warfare drill taking place at a training center that looks very much like the cities people live in here in South Korea. It's part of Seoul and Washington's Freedom Shield exercise, which kicked off on Monday. Soldiers are taking part in offensive and defensive operations despite the heavy rain for over 5 days.
This joint urban operation training was a valuable opportunity to verify Seoul and Washington's interoperability as one unit.
A total of 500 South Korean and U.S. soldiers are participating in the exercise day and night, using lasers and blank cartridges to stimulate actual battles. Various military assets were also deployed, including the U.S. Stryker armored vehicle. Despite the language barrier and bad weather, soldiers from both countries were able to cooperate and complete the mission together.
I can tell you everyone in my platoon had a great time working with the ROK Army. They've been incredibly professional. They really understand how we work together, and we had a great week out here this week.
South Korea's army has vowed to develop urban exercises suitable for future use in real-world scenarios by further improving combined arms training. Choi Min-jung, 아리랑뉴스.
And in line with the joint drills, the 4-day Ilji civil defense exercise was staged as well, including a nationwide air raid evacuation drill involving the public. People evacuated to nearby shelters, building basements, and subway stations in case of a North Korean missile attack. That exercise actually took place for the first time in 6 years. Our Song Yu-jin was at one of the sites.
For the first time in 6 years, South Korea on Wednesday carried out a nationwide air raid evacuation drill. This to enhance the nation's readiness against potential airstrikes like nuclear missile attacks, cyber intrusions, and drone terror. The same drill was carried out in May, but only at schools and public institutions. This time, it included the general public, except regions designated as special disaster zones due to the impact of this year's heavy rainfall. At 2 p.m. sharp, the country came to a standstill with the blaring of the minute-long air raid warning siren. Citizens swiftly made their way to nearby safety shelters like subway stations and basements.
So out of the more than 17,000 evacuation shelters nationwide, people can find the nearest ones on the Emergency Ready app like this, as well as the standard mobile navigation apps and also the National Disaster and Safety Portal.
To minimize disruption and inconvenience, hospitals, subways, trains, airplanes, and vessels operated as usual. But commuters on subways and trains were required to remain inside the stations for 15 minutes. During this time, they had the chance to learn CPR and take a look at counterterrorism equipment. Drivers were required to park on the side of the road so they could listen to safety instructions through radio broadcasts. For non-Koreans, the Interior Ministry distributed leaflets in 8 different languages at airports, immigration offices, and hotels across the country.
But every month we have like a test of sirens every first Sunday, but it's not like that we have to run to underground. It's like only like a siren and that's it, but nothing like more.
At 2:15 p.m., with the issuance of the guard alarm, people were allowed to leave the shelters, but with a sense of caution. 5 minutes later, the alarm was lifted, meaning that the 20-minute drill came to a close. When the next one will be held will be decided either late this year or early next. 송유진, 아리랑뉴스.
Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo reached a new level of trilateral cooperation at Camp David in a landmark summit last week. Seen as a milestone moment in the history of diplomacy in the 21st century, it's carved out a new mechanism for security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and set out a bolder role for South Korea's diplomacy. To discuss more, we have our Presidential Office correspondent Oh Soo-young back here in the studio. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tommy. Lovely to see you today.
So, Soo-young, lots of deliverables out of the Camp David Trilateral Summit. What do you have to say the key achievements are?
Right, well, as you said, Tammy, there were many initiatives that were announced after the leaders' meeting, but I would summarise the outcomes with 4 main points. First of all, putting the cogwheels in place to enable cooperation by establishing annual leaders' summits, as well as meetings between high-level officials on security, defence, foreign affairs and trade, as well as creating new dialogue channels in areas such as cyber defence, emerging technologies and even social development. Second were practical measures to deter North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities. A combined military drill once a year is to take place, along with the launch of a missile warning system by the end of the year. Third, the 3 countries agreed to jointly face the various economic uncertainties and new technologies that trigger changes across industries, the military, as well as society, through supply chain cooperation, as well as co-develop new technologies and ethical standards and measures to prevent theft. Lastly, South Korea, the United States and Japan are aiming to align their stances and act as one to any emerging security challenge. That is the very premise of the commitment to consult, where they immediately discuss new threats, whether that is North Korea's missile provocations or disruptions in a critical supply chain. Thus, you can see that the 3 countries are trying to act as one distinct and independent entity. It's not an alliance, but it is definitely a force to be reckoned with.
You know, Seoul, I have to ask you then, can the Camp David agreements live up to expectations? I mean, can they truly transform the security architecture of Indo-Pacific?
Right, well, you know, at the end of the day, all 3 countries are democracies with elections, so they are subject to and have certainly been these political changes in the leadership and the political environment in all 3 countries, and thus the Camp David measures were clearly designed to prevent, to the best of their ability, any backtracking on the progress seen in the relationship, particularly between Seoul and Tokyo since March, when they actively began building bridges over a historical dispute that spiraled into a trade war back in 2019.
That the 3 of them want to strengthen links at all levels, from the leaders level to the working level, including the expert level. There's also discussion about potentially working with the next generation of experts as well. So I think that means that this is a long-term ambition that the 3 of them share, and if it is implemented, it would really transform the relationship between the 3 of them, between Korea, the US and Japan.
It leaves the door open for greater military cooperation between the 3 countries as they combine their capabilities and enhance their interoperability.
Another productive initiative could focus on identifying areas for cooperations between Korean Massive Punishment and Retaliations (KMPR) and Japan's new precision strike capability. Both South Korea and Japan are improving their deterrence by developing the capabilities needed to retaliate against the DPRK attack with the rapid and devastating conventional strikes. The US, South Korea, and Japan should explore possible synergies between these efforts.
Also, beyond Korean Peninsula security, the 3 countries agreed to work closely with other value-based regional initiatives, such as the AUKUS Security Pact between Britain, the US and Australia, and the Quad, composed of the US, Japan, India and Australia. Now, their interests overlap not only on security issues, but also on vital non-military issues, such as key technologies, food security and development. Adding Korea to the mix would weave important initiatives together.
I think if you look at AUKUS, it is very technical. It is based on the delivery of nuclear power submarines. Plus, if you look at the second pillar, development of new technologies. So it's not about dialogue. Now, if we look at the Quad, it is really much more based on dialogue, summits at different levels. There are some scholarships involved. There's talk about initiatives that are going to be implemented together. But even if you look, for example, at technology, it's something that the 4 members of the Quad cannot implement unless they're working together with Korea, with Taiwan, maybe with European countries as well. So that's.
But obviously, China is going to see these recent developments as a threat to its security, because the Camp David Trilateral Summit particularly included that criticism of China's behavior. Now, the question is, will this put South Korea in a difficult position, right?
Right, there certainly have been concerns over what this means for South Korea's trade and cooperation on North Korea's denuclearization efforts as well. among other issues affecting the two neighbours. But relations with China have arguably always been difficult to manage, given the pressure on Seoul to be deferential to Beijing. On top of the rather obvious cases of forceful diplomacy, economic coercion and belligerent behaviour in the South China Sea, China is posing a vastly different, strongly authoritarian model of development and values in the world, using its clout and harnessing emerging technologies in ways that could disrupt and undermine individuals, societies, business prospects and intellectual property. Like most European Union countries, Seoul has also maintained that it wants to continue trade and cooperation with China in necessary fields. But at Camp David, it was made clear that its fundamental values align with the free world. Now, China has reacted very nervously and rather angrily to the growing cooperation between the United States and its neighbours. But experts say, given the vitality of economic ties with South Korea and the slowing growth for the Chinese economy, Beijing might not act as rashly as it did in the past to punish Seoul.
And to Beijing's dismay, it only recorded 6.3 growth over the second quarter, although it was expected to reach at 7.1%. So under the circumstances, economic issues are at the forefront, and Beijing needs South Korea more than before. So we can expect no punitive economic measures coming from Beijing too soon at this stage.
Well, considering the divergent domestic views of Yoon's diplomacy in South Korea, where does this trilateral cooperation place South Korea in the region and in the world? I mean, is it worth it for Seoul?
Well, all signs seem to say yes. So the presidential office has said that South Korea has now reached a point where it stands alongside advanced economies with democratic societies. Now, this means calling for international rules and norms to be respected, caring about human rights and supporting development in regions that brings freedom for all citizens. Thus, the Yoon administration has taken a bolder stance on regional and global affairs compared to the past, when the country focused on trade relations and tried to rather evade politically contentious issues. Now, as much as there are clear costs for doing so, mostly economically, Seoul's value-based choice and alignment with other democratic countries have enabled a greater and deeper level of trust, really elevating its status and expanding its involvement in multilateral institutions. Now, experts say South Korea's role in global governance has been underscored, especially after President Yoon's strengthening of ties with NATO and Ukraine as well, to which he made a surprise visit last month.
But also you have seen a strengthening of relations with Poland, with Estonia, with Norway, with other NATO members that are also boosting their arms deals with Korea, but also the security links with Korea. So you can see how the position of Korea beyond its core alliance, which is the US, and even beyond its core region, which is Northeast Asia, has been boosted thanks to its relationship with NATO.
Well, according to the presidential office, contributing to human rights, rule of law and freedom across the region and the world as well really promotes peace and prosperity, which in turn would not only boost South Korea's security, but also economic opportunities through diverse trade, technological and cultural exchanges with advanced tech nations like the United States and Japan, as well as new emerging markets.
Right, in the long run, that trickles down to the livelihood of everyday people.
Exactly.
Well, it's still early days, but it looks like there's a great potential for the three-way cooperation to expand and benefit the countries, the region, and eventually the world.
I think you're exactly right, Tammy.
All right, Seohyung, thank you so much for your reporting today, as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
From August 31st, coronavirus will be treated and managed like seasonal flu here in South Korea. The country will downgrade the infection classification level of the virus to Class 4. That's the lowest class. Our Choi Soo-hyung has the major changes.
Starting from August 31st, the South Korean government will lower COVID-19's infectious disease level from Group 2 to Group 4. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said on Wednesday that this decision was made due to a decrease in the spread of COVID-19 since the end of June, a reduction in virus risk, overall stable epidemic prevention conditions, and sufficient capacity within the general healthcare system.
The government made the decision to classify COVID-19 as a Group 4 infectious disease by examining those circumstances, and it plans to implement the second stage of measures according to the COVID-19 roadmap announced in March.
Furthermore, the agency stated that although one or two major and minor COVID-19 outbreaks are expected each year, most countries worldwide have already been managing COVID-19 within their general medical systems. The decision means the focus now will shift from counting daily case numbers to protecting high-risk groups. The downgrade from Group 2 to Group 4 means there will be no more daily reporting of confirmed case numbers, which had been going on for 3 years and 7 months. Also, under Group 4, people no longer need to report COVID-19 infections within 24 hours, nor do they need to isolate. Instead, the government plans to operate a more precise monitoring system to observe the COVID-19 trend on a weekly basis. However, the officials said that even with the transition to Group 4, there are still ongoing concerns about new COVID-19 variants.
The greater the number of transmission, the greater the chances of occurrences of yet another new variant. In that regard, we should also keep a close eye on what can come from purely just this high numbers of daily new cases, not just within our nation, but in other countries as well.
The KDCA said that masks will still be required for the time being at infection-vulnerable facilities such as hospitals and nursing homes. Additionally, support for COVID-19 diagnosis and treatment costs, operation of screening clinics, and the supply of vaccines and treatments will still be provided free of charge for now. The government stated that it will manage the epidemic situation in a stable manner going forward. Choi Soo-hyung, 아리랑뉴스.
We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.